Thank you, Carla. It is my honor to now hand things off to Dr. Stephanie Selvik, Director of the P.B. Poorman Pride Center at UW-Whitewater, who will introduce our guest speakers. Before this introduction, I wanted to acknowledge that this conversation is co-sponsored by UW-Madison's Disability Studies Initiative, the UW-Madison Anonymous Fund, the Kemper-Knapp Bequest Fund, UW-Madison's Program of Asian American Studies, the Multicultural Student Center, and the Asian Pacific American Student Center. It is now my pleasure to offer the floor to Stephanie Selvik, who will introduce our keynotes for this evening.
Thanks, Stephanie. Hi, everyone. I have the real pleasure to introduce Alice Wong and Sami Schalk for their keynote conversation tonight. My name is Stephanie Selvik. I use they, them, and she, her pronouns, and I work as LGBTQ coordinator at UW-Whitewater. Interestingly enough, I work on a campus where 10% of our student population is formally registered through the Center for Students with Disabilities, a center that was founded in 1970 and celebrated its 50th anniversary last year. I work on a campus that was ranked 5th on a list of the most wheelchair-friendly campuses by New Mobility magazine. Ours is one where the wheelchair basketball team is regularly celebrated in the media for their successes at the Paralympics. I work with colleagues who imagine creative solutions to access barriers and provide resources that students might not otherwise have at other institutions. And the legacy of this work has been life-changing. But ours is still a campus that is steeped in the rhetoric of access through formal accommodations and language that still stems from federal obligation in the ADA. Ours still uses rhetoric that often puts the burden of proving a disability on the person and doesn't frame access as an act of love or care or something that we all obviously need. The consortium conference this year asks us to think about what the pandemic reveals about the type of world we want to rebuild. On our campus, the pandemic has made visible the way in which we all deserve radically reimagined educational spaces, ones that make space for taking breaks, and having our mental and physical access needs acknowledged and accepted without question. The pandemic has escalated a strong interest in advancing disability justice across UW system, particularly within women's and gender studies departments, and especially quote unquote post-pandemic. And this conversation between Alice Wong and Sami Schalk is one example of this intent. Alice Wong is a disabled activist, writer, media maker, and consultant. She founded and directs the Disability Visibility Project, an online community dedicated to creating and amplifying disability media and culture. This project works to push back on media that represents disabled people through a negative lens, and instead offers new media that records and publishes richer and different stories. Wong's path to advocacy began when she was a young person, learning how to articulate her needs to teachers and other adults. She shares that in many ways she didn't have a choice to be an advocate. Alice Wong's story shows that the personal is political, and Wong herself says that there's really no way to separate her personal intersectional identities from her political position. She also believes in the power of storytelling as culture-shifting activist work. From 2013 to 2015, Wong was appointed by Barack Obama to serve as a member of the National Council on Disability. In 2016, she received the AAPD Leadership Award, an award that celebrates emerging leaders with disabilities that do cross-disability activism. In 2018, she was featured in the Bitch 50, a list recognizing the most impactful creators, artists, and activists in pop culture, curated by Bitch Media and Colorlines magazine. In 2020, she was named by Time magazine as one of the top 16 people fighting for equality in America. Alice Wong is joining us in conversation with Sami Schalk. Sami is an associate professor of gender and women's studies at UW-Madison. She is a pleasure activist, a writer for Tone magazine, and a board member at Freedom Inc., a Black and Southeast Asian activist and advocacy organization in Madison. Both Wong and Schalk were trained in English, and actually I was too. And both Sami and Alice show the radical potential of humanities training as providing a foundation for strengthening our imagination to think of and work toward different, more equitable, more pleasurable futures. Sami's first book, Body Mind Reimagined, Disability, Race, and Gender, studies and celebrates Black women-authored speculative fiction that does precisely this. Texts that reimagine the possibility of body minds and shift the way we interpret categories like disability, race, gender, and sexuality. In her second, much anticipated book, Black Disability Politics, Sami shows the centrality of disability activism within Black activism. Wong has a much anticipated memoir coming out in September titled Year of the Tiger, An Activist Life, and Sami's monograph will be available the very next month in October. In 2019, Sami was awarded LGBTQ Advocate of the Year by Outreach LGBT Community Center for her work advocating for racial, queer, and disability justice. It is my pleasure to welcome Alice Wong in conversation with Sami Schalk.
Hey everyone. Stephanie, thank you so much for that kind introduction.
Take your spotlight off.
And Sami, how you doing?
Hi. I was just about to say, just as Steph introduced us, my cat jumped on the chair. So also my cat Alice, Madam Alice, is here joining our conversation.
You know, all Alice's are welcome.
Absolutely. It is so good to see you.
You know, I feel like before we dive in, because we will have so much to share, to just hold space for each other, I just want to, share my gratitude for not just being invited here, but to really be in conversation with you, a fellow bad bitch, and somebody I've just admired for so long. And, I just thought about just the other day as I was getting ready for our talk, that I interviewed you for my podcast way back in 2019 when your book, Body Minds Reimagined, came out. I did an episode of the Disability podcast with you and Dr. Subiri Harama. And it was about disability studies. And, just that felt like it's only 3 years ago, but it feels like a lifetime. And I'm just so grateful for you and to be part of your universe, because I remember emailing you. You didn't know me. You was like, hey, you want to be on, and here we are now.
I mean, it was a no-brainer for me. I was so honored that you asked me. I already loved the podcast. I loved your work. It means so much to so many of us, but particularly those of us who are disabled folks of color. Your work has brought so many people together and just highlighted our stories in ways that honestly, helped me find my next book project and wanting to really think about Black folks engaging with disability differently. So yeah, it is an absolute honor to be here with you and getting to talk to you. And yeah, I'm excited for it. This cat is gonna be a lot.
Oh, I love it, because you know what? Cats are never too much. Okay, let's put that out there.
She just thinks it's always her show.
It's our show. It's okay. It's funny because in my memoir, I write about how much I love cats, and I had a lot of big cat energy. So I feel it. But I think what you just said about your thinking about your book and just, the relationships we have and the power of disabled culture, in particular, disabled people of color. I think it's been a long time coming, right? And especially in disability studies, which I think has been historically very white, which is why I wanted you and Sami to be on my podcast. I've been very intentional about, making sure that people to center us, because I think for so long we have not been centered.
Yeah.
It's a really exciting thing that's, whether we realize it or not, we're all influencing each other and helping each other, not to only find space, but to feel seen and heard, but also to advance our thinking.
Absolutely.
I love that. I love that about us.
Yeah, it's being more in community with disabled folks of color has totally transformed the way that I think about disability as someone who kind of came up inside of white disability studies, because that's what I was given to read. And so that's what I read. And then seeking out other texts and finding, disability Twitter just really changed everything.
Yes, and I think
Do you want to get into these questions that folks have prepared for us?
let's do it.
Moving my cat out of the way of the questions. Okay. All right. So the first question we have is thinking about the pandemic. And I think throughout this conference, folks are going to be thinking about the impact of the pandemic. And so how do you think the pandemic has exposed or even exacerbated ableist oppression?
Yeah, I would say that's hopefully if it's not obvious to people by now, this bears repeating, but eugenics is real, ableism is real, white supremacy is real, medical racism is real and explicit. Like you can't unsee it, and it has always been here, right? Like pre-pandemic, right? Disabled folks, marginalized folks have always had to struggle and survive. And, this is where, again, I think when we think about oppression, we should also think about the role of states, the role of institutions like academia, which are complicit in all of it and perpetuate it. And frankly, are still not held accountable. I do want to mention that I think I am very grateful that this conference is still online because we've seen ableist oppression really come out full force this year as there's a huge push to go back to normal. Yeah, normal was fucked up to begin with. So many people, for example, if we're talk about UW or other universities, they're putting staff, faculty, and students who are high risk in very dangerous positions. People have to make these horrible decisions, right? Whether to work or to, put their families at risk, to put their body minds at risk. Students who have fought for decades to just have online learning as a possibility, and then it took a pandemic for everyone to suddenly realize, oh, this is possible, or that it took non-disabled people to be inconvenienced or just slightly impacted to suddenly make all of these things happen. Right, all this infrastructure, all these resources that suddenly that weren't available somehow to those who've been agitating for it. But suddenly it took a global pandemic, millions of people dead or surviving from, hopefully recovery, but also this mass disabling event. Suddenly things slightly opened up, but I think I'm curious about your thoughts. I see a lot of inroads and progress made in terms of access to really closing back up. That's universities now, just taking a lot of these things. And I want to mention that, even before the pandemic, I do not fly. I do not have travel privilege like a lot of folks. It's just too hard on my body. So I wouldn't even be able to travel to a conference like this and give a keynote if it wasn't for these kinds of options. And I think, when we move forward, we can't go back. We should really learn from everything that we've experienced and been traumatized by and create a new world. I think that's the way forward. And, if we think about universities and events like this, think about all of the people that you're missing out on. You don't have these kinds of options. People without, whether it's class issues or just, access issues, you're missing a lot of people who just can't take time off. or to
Yeah.
fly or just get to places easily.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so this is where I'm really mindful of, like in terms of my own history privilege, but also just feeling so frustrated and just overwhelmed by the real oppression that's happening, that's coming back with a real vengeance in terms of wanting to return to the status quo. Like, how do you feel about that, especially as you've kind of, you know, with the semester, just a school year, just, teaching and working on campus?
Yeah. I mean, I have been disappointed with our university's response to the pandemic, particularly, seeing lots of faculty have requests to teach online denied. So our first full pandemic year of teaching, we were permitted to choose to teach online if that's what we wanted. And now it's this elaborate process that we have to apply for, and people are getting denied. And you have to have, this very formal disability accommodation that you have to prove that you're, particularly at risk in some way. And very few people are getting that accepted, which also then means that there are less online classes available for our disabled students. And the mask mandates have been lifted here. Students can choose whether or not to wear masks in the classroom. Faculty cannot require masks in the classroom. And so I'm having a lot of conversations with my students from a disability studies perspective about why this is a problem. But I see students and myself and colleagues feeling so disempowered in the face of an institution that refuses to remain adaptable outside of that one brief moment where suddenly everyone was so creative and able to think of all the different things that we could do and adaptable. And then we go right back to this like stiff exclusionary way that we understand how higher ed should happen. So it's been disappointing and it's been scary. It's not been my favorite experience. And I just wanted to say, while you were talking about conferences, keeping this conference online and so many conferences now dropping any kind of virtual options for participants or for speakers, in the before times when people would talk about it, they were like, well, that's too bad for those people who can't come or whatever, right? But what I was just thinking as you were talking is like, also, that's too bad for us. Like, we don't get to have these incredible speakers that you're going to deny being a part of these events, who could teach us so much simply because they can't be here in person, right? So it impacts us in these ways that we can't even realize, that it limits who we are in conversation with. And we need to be in conversation with more people to even realize what we are missing.
Yeah, and again, not to knock on universities, but I will. But they love DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, but they kind of forget that if you really want to live those values, you have to practice them. And you're losing so many people that's really by class, to be honest, like people living near at poverty. That's part of the diversity of perspectives, and that just really does not sit well with me. And I think this is again what disability justice brings to the center, right? It's really centering the most marginalized. And I think what kind of world can we imagine if policies about the pandemic, policies about learning, about pedagogy, about administrations, what if those were the least, who had to really develop some very sophisticated skill sets and knowledge? What if they were in charge? What if we shared power? And this isn't some like pie in the sky, unrealistic imagining, but it's a real, it really is possible, because we see throughout history, right? Like people constantly dismiss and anybody who's trying to really dream big. And I think dreaming big is absolutely part of what it means to have a new future, reimagining, and just remaking the world that we deserve.
Yeah. I mean, we have to be able to picture something better to continue to move forward. I have to believe it, and I have to picture it as way better than this. Otherwise, what's the point?
And I think in addition to, white supremacy, systemic ableism, we have to bring in, hyper-capitalism. And that is really one of the drivers of all of these things. And, I want to just, if it's okay right now, I want to read a few lines from a poem by Dr. Ellis Samuels, who is an associate professor at UW and a founding member of the UW Disability Studies Initiative. She actually tweeted this in February, a poem called Elegy for Mask Mandates. And it's in one of the links that I just dropped a bunch of links in the chat box if anybody wants. These are some of the references based on things we'll be talking about today, but there's a link in there with Ella's poem. I'm just going to read just a few lines because it really speaks to collective care and collective responsibility. Because again, this whole overemphasis on personal responsibility about the individual really kind of neglects the idea that change and real change really happens collectively. Access is a collective effort. So this is just a few lines. It's just, I think, something that deeply resonates with me. And just read it real quick. So here we go. We learn to speak a new vocabulary to understand what it means to protect each other so we all survive. If I hope now, in my lonely bed, I'm still speaking those words to the silent house. My mask protects you. Your mask protects me. I couldn't say it better. And I think this speaks to art and poetry and culture that is reflective of our lived experiences. And this is also why so much of my work is so focused on us, because again, I think disabled people are oracles. We say things, we do things, we prophesize, right? Like 2020, we do how shit was gonna happen. And here we are now, almost 2+ years, and we're under so many variants, and there will be more variants. But we're done with this inconsistent messaging regarding masking, regarding vaccines, regarding who is disposable, right? Whose bodies are disposable. But then this medical industrial complex we've seen it really, highlight those who are not seen as human, right? Disabled people of color, fat people, immunocompromised people, Black, brown, indigenous people. And this is where it's on all of us to really see this, to understand the wisdom, and to do something about it. So I just, I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, I think that at the beginning, it was only my disabled friends that were saying, buckle up, strap in, this is going to be a while. It was my disabled friends who could tell me what the best masks were to get well before anybody was required to wear them. There are so many ways that disabled folks know how to live and survive in conditions that are not amenable to our body minds, and we figure it out together. And folks were learning from disabled people, even as simple as learning how to use Zoom and digital meetings on a regular basis. It was my disabled friends that already were doing this to connect with one another, and we were teaching the non-disabled people how to do this, right? And now they're just all going to walk away from it, just walk away from it and from us.
And the whole value that we can still have very vibrant social lives online. A lot of people already had that pre-pandemic.
Yeah.
It was definitely poo-pooed, right? It was seen as in real life, in-person events were somehow heavily weighted and much more privileged.
Yeah.
Right? Those face-to-face interactions were the ones that mattered compared to, let's say, digital organizers or digital conferences or parties, disco parties. I've seen disabled people really celebrate and show what they do during the pandemic, create a community, create places where refuges, right? Just like places where we just be.
Mhm.
And I think that's been missing in terms of really, we've been through so much trauma. Clearly, things are hard, but we also need to find places of love and care. And that to me is the real radical part, right? Like just being able to form these connections, whether it's a group chat. Sometimes I see you on Twitter, I'm just like, yes, like just makes me happy whenever I see like your new outfits or just like, just you living your life and loving your life. And that to me brings me joy. And I think, just like Ash says, we all have the capacity to give joy, to give love. Mutual aid is so much more than just doing things like raising money, buying groceries, sewing masks, even though it's those things. But a lot of it is just creating space for each other, listening. I think sometimes it's about sharing, it's about sharing information, which I think has happened definitely on disability Twitter a lot.
Yeah.
And I think there's so much for the new cohorts of people that are going to be living with COVID now. They're going to be welcomed, hopefully, into this community, but also they're going to discover gaslighting. They're going to discover ableism. They're going to discover that, believe it or not, the state and the systems around us do not serve us. And these were things that we do already, right?
Yeah.
Communities of color are going to do this, as we see with the, just the huge gaps in vaccine equity. Don't get me started, right? I could just talk about that for hours, but I think
Yeah.
it's like huge gaps, and I think you can't deny how racism and ableism and ageism operates, right? This is why these things happen, because they want us to die. They don't want us to live, to be honest.
Right. Yeah, find no value. So you've talked about a couple of things that answer this next question in terms of producing art, producing spaces, and care for one another. Can you tell folks a little bit more about ways that the disability justice movement has responded to the pandemic?
Yeah, I think it's much about, I've seen a lot of wonderful community organizing, at all kinds of levels, right? It's like sometimes people are intimidated by that term. Like sometimes I have been described as a community organizer, and I'm like, am I? They're like, yes, I am. And that's like, it took me a long time to kind of come around to that too, because sometimes it's about these images and narratives that we see, right? Who gets to be an activist?
Mm-hmm.
For years, it took me a long time to think about, I guess I am an activist, like with a capital A. And I'm okay with that, even though I felt like, so much of it was just not visibilized. And I think this is a real process for me of unlearning and learning again. And it's always this kind of recursive process. But I think there's so much community care that happens. There's rest, there's joy, there's celebration. There's people such as, the Best Oakland, which is an organization in the Bay Area that even, climate change is real. And, before the pandemic, they were, giving away free masks, especially to unhoused people and people of color who need to protect themselves. And, so many, I think, communities, marginalized communities, have always done mutual aid, whether they call it mutual aid or not. Right? Sometimes it's just about making soup or if you help making your call, I'll make a phone call for you. Like that's mutual aid, I think, and I think, or retweeting somebody's, GoFundMe campaign, right? Like these, all the little things and all the big things matter. I think another example that I've seen is an organization like Health Justice Trumpets. They've actually organized various webinars and political education about the medical industrial complex. Like, I feel like that's the kind of thing done by, marginalized folks that really are going to help people understand the way systems really work versus how they're supposed to work. I've seen culture, just wonderful culture and art. Susan Valid, one of the kind of originators of the disability justice framework, in particular Patty Bird, BRNE. They came out recently with a disability justice coloring book. It's the A to Z of disability justice. And that gives me joy, right? Beauty. I think sometimes people think about activism, people think about the challenges that disabled folks feel, that disabled folks have so much up against them. And yet we can't forget the pleasure. We can't forget the joy. We can't forget all of the things that make us feel alive. And I think a lot of that for me personally has really been about the friendships and the relationships I've built over the years. And, with the shit hit the fan, these last 2+ years, you really know who your people are. And I think that to me has been a real source of comfort. How about you? Where have you found comfort and joy in your life? How have you kind of, because this is what I do. I think it's another, this is really cool.
Yeah.
We just check in with each other about how are you doing? Like, what's giving you life?
I mean, yeah, a lot of gatherings that take people's COVID needs into consideration and just having really frank conversations. I think it's clear to me the folks that are in disability culture and really care are saying, do you want to be outside? Do you want to wear, like, what do you want to do? What do you need? Do you want a rapid test? Really thinking about these things. That has been really great. The way, it feels like an act of love, of a new form of access intimacy to really try to understand what each other need, and what risks people can and cannot take as we continue to navigate this. And during, I've been calling it peak pandemic, like pre-vaccine, where we just had no clue what anything was doing, and locked in our houses. I was doing a lot of dressing up. That was my main thing, dressing up and sharing it on the internet and being connected to people that way. That was how I got little bits of joy and human connection during that. Obviously I still like to dress up, but I was doing it a lot every single day as a way of just giving myself something to do that felt good at a time that was really scary. It was really scary for so many of us. think especially for, disabled folks, but I live alone. So I was like, I'm a disabled person living alone. If I get this, I don't know what's going to happen, So that was one of the things I did to both bring myself joy, but also connect with others, bring others joy. It was a big compersion cycle of things happening at that time. Yeah, those are things that I've been doing, and, really thinking about pleasure activism more. I think the pandemic has forced me to engage with it in this new way that felt really, really essential, because things have felt just so heavy and so dark, that I needed to really figure out how to tap into that pleasure and in new ways that were safe, right? Because some of the things I used to do, like going out dancing, are just not options. They're just not options for me right now. So yeah, that's been things that I've done. I want to make sure we get to one question just for the, our little academic friends in the audience. One of the questions on the list here is about how we can bring disability justice practices of access and care into the classroom. So I'm wondering if you have some thoughts and suggestions for folks on.
Yeah, I would say that, I guess, here we are I want to hold, institutions accountable. And I think one thing to come out of this, the last 2+ years, is hopefully people are just tired of putting up with the things they are. I love seeing people like unionize. I love seeing students just like hold it down. I love seeing adjuncts, teachers. I think people are less inclined to accept the exploitative and abusive traditions, the extractive traditions that I think just academia is guilty of, but every institution. But here we are talking this for this conference, so let's just focus on that, because I think any university's policies, you have to go beyond lip service, right? You have to have your actions absolutely have to align with your values. And I think a lot of institutions are great at proclaiming that they care, but really through their actions or lack of actions, that they show that disabled and other high risk students, faculty, staff do not matter. If you really believe that people are not disposable, you can't leave them behind. You can't force students or staff to take medical leave, right? Just because they're not allowed the accommodations they had in the last 2 years. This is violence. This is oppression. This is discrimination. You have to send to the most impacted, and that means giving a series of power, right? It's not just about a top-down kind of leadership. But again, this is easier to say, harder to do. I think one of the most exciting things I've seen, recently, and again, this is another thing that we can learn from disability justice, is the importance of cross-movement organizing. Recent example is from UCLA. UCLA recently had one of the largest sit-ins by a coalition of students who striked for hybrid access and more equity for marginalized students. And this was led by the Disabled Student Union in solidarity with other student groups at UCLA. So I'm just going to read just like a short paragraph by a UCLA student body president, Breeze Velasquez, which was from just February this year. Just I think I would love, UW to hear this, and for the UW community to hear this, because this is not just about UCLA, not just about universities, but every institution. So Breeze wrote, "We are calling for the bare minimum Digital equity and access to education in the middle of a pandemic that may be minimally affecting able-bodied people. So even that is up for debate. But it's directly threatening the lives of immunocompromised and disabled people. This is not a matter of faculty choice or individual suggestions toward dual modality. No one should be shut out of education. We understand the individual faculty may be unsure of how to move forward. We reject the notion that it should be left up to the individual. The institution should uplift and support students with concrete resources, and when offices and bodies are able to make true commitments to supporting students, we can ensure that calls for remote learning will not overburden faculty with more work. I think that really says it better than anything I just said.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts about that as a faculty member?
Yeah, I mean, organizing in this moment, I think, is really essential. That requires organizing across students, faculty, staff, and that, you know, graduate students and undergraduate students. And yeah, we don't have to go into all the ways that this university makes organizing difficult.
Or should we?
Well, there's a whole thing on freedom of speech zones where students can only like protest in certain places, which it's a mess. But I do think there are other ways of organizing that folks have been trying to do. I know our graduate student union has been trying to organize more, especially as the mask mandates were dropped here. And, you know, what I tell my students is that, you know, the university keeps us exhausted for a reason. It's harder to organize when we all feel so stressed out and so strained that we can't find an extra minute of time to put into something like this that requires thought and planning and connection and time, right? So that is part of the mechanism of how they make it very hard to continue to do the kind of organizing work, the large scale organizing work that would be necessary to really create change here.
And also, I would say that another example of ableist suppression is the fact that society makes it sound like access is the scarcity, the scarce resource that only belongs to those who are most deserving, both those who get jump through the hoops, do the paperwork, go through all of the emotional and intellectual labor, and also those with the privilege of having a diagnosis, those with the privilege to get tested, those with the privilege to have a paper trail. Because we do know, you and I know, there are a lot of people that are disabled with access needs that will never get accommodations in the workplace or in their learning environments because they don't have, quote unquote, the proof. And again, this is how ableism is so insidious. It makes it sound like you're not disabled enough, or that you have to fight for the crumbs, or that it takes a gauntlet. And again, they want us to be exhausted so that they make us think that, well, this is a system. I gotta get by while I can, versus really trying to dismantle the system, which again is a long game, right? It is a marathon, it's not a sprint. And I think that's a hard thing with student activism, right? Because students are only there, you know, for a certain number of years.
Yeah.
So again, that's why solidarity and cross-movement organizing is so important. That we need all these different perspectives and, you know, just all of this kind of energy and vapor to recognize that it's about the long haul, the long, hard work to change things. And I think that's why culture change, I think, is also just it's a very glacial pace, right? And I think what I do with my work with the disability projects is just a drop of the bucket, but it's my attempt and just my contribution to this larger movement, right? This larger movement that's tied in with your move, just with your work and your being. I think this is what it's all about. And that to me is exciting. And that's what we should learn from disability justice, right? Like my well-being is tied in with your well-being. That we move forward together.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
that's liberation. That's justice.
Yeah. I think that's one of my favorite things about being connected to so many folks in disability justice is that we really do believe that our work is together, even if we're not literally working together. And so every time I see you getting awards and praise and raising your platform and, Amani and Valissa and all these folks making the news and getting more attention to these issues, we all win. It's not some activist, academic, organizer competition. It is about us moving forward. And so that's part of the joy, is celebrating each other and celebrating every win. Every single win that each of us gets moves us a little bit forward when we're in alignment with our values, right?
It is about abundance, right? It's not about scarcity.
Yeah.
It's not to say that we all have to be best friends or anything. Because we're not, and we're not a monolith. We are not by any means. And we all don't know each other. Let's just put that out there. But I do think that despite the dumps of fire that is social media, I've been really so lucky to have had such wonderful relationships and friendships with people. And that sustains me, and that I want everyone to win. I'm rooting for everyone. Like I'm so excited for your book.
I'm so excited for your book.
And I'm so excited for the actually Samara Sitta's book. Leah was the keynote last year for this event. In her book, the future is disabled. I feel like your book, Leah's book, my book, all timed for this fall. There's something cosmic about this alignment. All this energy and just like power. I think, first of all, our fall is just being very busy. But I really, for me, the privilege and pleasure I imagine having this fall and next year going forward is to support your work, to support Leah's work, to shout it from the rooftops, to celebrate you all, because we all deserve. And I think there's something about sometimes we're made to feel small sometimes, that we have to be like grateful. Yeah, sometimes people think, oh, you're showboating, but it's like, why not? Because sometimes there's so many people out there to not celebrate you sometimes. And sometimes you have to celebrate yourself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that the definition of kind of loving yourself? Because that's kind of the energy you want to share with people. Not to say that it's a selfish thing, because there's enough love for everyone.
There sure is. And especially completing a book, and yours is a memoir, which is so deeply personal. It's a lot of work to write a book, and I feel like it warrants celebration when you put that into the world, because it can be so scary to put your work in the world. So you celebrate it, and when people like it, when one person gets something out of it, you celebrate that, because it means so much to do this work and have any impact at all. So yeah, I'm so excited. So your book will be out this fall in
September 6th.
September, and it's called Year of the Tiger. So just so folks know, it's absolutely perfect. There's a link now in the chat for pre-order. Definitely get those pre-orders in. So in our last 15 minutes, I want to address some of the audience questions. So let's see, where do I want to start? So one place that I want to start out, some of these are anonymous. So there's a question, do you think that disability studies will be more frequently seen as a degree in college in the future, similar to how women's and gender studies like emerged in the 70s? So is this something that you think it's going to continue to move into the academic spaces more widely, I guess?
I certainly hope so. And I think, I've also seen the growth of Asian American studies. And I really do hope that we see more scholars that are not only multidisciplinary, but just see more universities place value on these programs, right? Let's have the minors, let's have the majors, let's have graduate degrees in these studies, because these really do speak to our times and also our need for these studies, right? Because for so many people like myself, we didn't know our history, right? We didn't know about so many things, and I think it's been also, purposely erased. So this is why these humanities are so important. But in particular, disability studies is absolutely important. And, I think I'm so jealous of this person that straddles a little bit of the academic world, but not former academic. But I'm curious about your thoughts too about the future of disability studies. I'm excited
Yeah.
I'm here for it, but I think there's a long way to go. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's still such a new field. People weren't even really writing, what we would consider disability studies text until like the early 90s, right? So in terms of it becoming established as programs and majors and minors, I think it's going to take a while still. But I do think it's important, and I do think it's valuable, especially if the field can resist some of its earlier, focus on whiteness and its emphasis on, physical disabilities, really incorporate intellectual and mental disabilities. If it can continue to do that work, I think it really can grow. Here at UW-Madison, I teach a class on gender, disability, and sexuality every year. And every year it fills, and there is a wait list as big as the class itself. People want it, students want it, and they get something out of it. They really do. I have students who come into their disability identities through the class. It's really, I mean, as a non-religious person, it might be the closest thing I have to being evangelical, where I'm like, come be with me, come with my people, because no, it's one of the things that they're just not exposed to. A lot of students now will have had some exposure to ideas around race and gender, even if not as extensively as they might get in a college course. They've had that, but disability still doesn't seem to be part of the way they're thinking about justice and social and inclusion, all these things, unless they have a disability or have a sibling with a disability, and that's it. And so I want that to be more of the regular gen ed kind of exposure that students get here, in addition to the way that they're encouraged to think about race and gender.
Yeah, and it's not like either or, but I want
Right.
to see more disability studies, but I also want to see every single department have courses on disability, right? Like schools of public health obviously need more disability. The philosophy, bioethics, they are in desperate need because there's hella ableist, right? So we definitely need more disability everywhere. It's not seen as just as this sort of like pathological, biometrical idea of disability. So definitely more everywhere. And yeah, just hopefully if students, campaign on it and demand it, maybe universities will listen. a
Yeah.
little bit of organizing ideas, people.
Yes. Okay, so we have a question from Sienna. So she says, I've read Disability Visibility, first person stories from the 21st century. And I'm wondering how the book Year of the Tiger will be different from this book. Will it include more personal stories or will it consist of many perspectives from various people? So can you tell folks a little bit about what Year of the Tiger will be like?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Sienna. And thank you for reading the anthology. So just to give a little context, the anthology that came out in 2020 was really the first book deal I had with a major publisher. And when I had this opportunity, I didn't want to center myself. I really wanted to maximize this opportunity just in case it was the last one. So I wanted to put as many different perspectives and disabled folks front and center, especially disabled people of color, who has not gotten the shine, right? So that was very intentional with this anthology. So fast forward to 2021 or 2020, the fall after the book came out, I thought, okay, what's my follow-up? A few people asked me, am I going to do a part two, another anthology? And I could, I absolutely have a lot of ideas for another anthology, but I thought, this might be a good time to do something different. I really am looking for, speaking of pleasure, things that bring me joy, things that, are creatively challenging. I've done the anthology, it was a great experience, but I want to switch things up, right? I'm going to spend 2 years on something. I want to, do something that's fun and different. So I put in a proposal for a memoir, and it's a combination of new essays by me, personal stories. Also, there's going to be pieces I already have published. So it's sort of a mini anthology of me, which is kind of funny. But I think it's been also just a really wonderful experience and huge privilege, right? To have a chance to look back at your work and really pull things together, because I just tell you, this sounds kind of obnoxious, but but anyway, looking back at all that I've written and done, I was like, oh damn, like I saw connections, like I did not realize when I wrote this, it would lead me to that. And this book will hopefully show people kind of some of the things, some of the interconnections, some of the things that have been heavy on my mind during the pandemic. Writing this in the midst of the height of the pandemic, we can argue whether this is the height, but it's also been extremely timely, because I've been very much about speculative nonfiction, right? Like, what do I want the future to be? What do I imagine? I have a chapter on the future of care. I have a, I guess I should share this, why not? I wrote about like what my future life would be like. Things like that. I think this has been such a joyful experience, which I think is, again, very opposite of what people think in terms of writing. Right? Writing is torture. Writing and editing is work. But I can say honestly, I've had, and I was intentional, right? I was designed it by design. I wanted to have fun writing this memoir, and I really hope if people read it, that joy and that pleasure comes across. I just, that to me is is my hope that people will find it's joyful.
I love that. Thank you.
What are you looking forward to with your book? Because I'm super excited. Is there any kind of preview or just
Sure. Yeah. Thank you for asking.
Yeah.
I really hope that Black people read this book. That's the thing that I've just been saying. I think my first book was taken up so joyfully inside of disability studies, and it meant so much. And folks in science fiction studies and women's studies, but I really want more Black people to read this work and Black studies folks, because I want to invite them into disability studies and disability justice. That's what I want. And so I'm really excited because the book is going to be open access. And I was able to use an award that I got here to pay my press to make it open access. So anybody is going to be able to read it. So I'm really excited about just taking a totally different approach to taking it into the world and really trying to connect with like activist organizations and folks that it's just there, and we don't have to worry about money for folks to have access to it. Because all I want is for people to read it. That's all I want. And so I'm really excited for that, because it was something that I had hoped would be a possibility, but I just didn't know if it could happen or how it would happen, especially with academic publishing. But we made it happen. So yeah, I'm excited about that.
And that's an act of care and access. I think we talked earlier about the future of disability studies. And I think part of it has to be writing in a way that's more accessible to lay people, not academics. Like sometimes I'm just like, I've read some articles, I'm just like, about really well done disability studies journal. I'm like, I'm disabled. I do not understand anything this person wrote. And I feel like this is a loss. This is a missed opportunity. This is, if we have more academics of any discipline writing in a much more plain language that's more accessible to by people. Also, let's also mention about academic publishing, right? That the books that academic publishers are set at such a high price point, or journals behind paywalls, or people without institutional access. Because, I used to work at a university, I had access. I haven't had access for like 5 years. So if there are articles that I am looking for, I have to ask my friends, right? So these are real barriers to knowledge. These are real barriers that are artificial, that we can also, that solutions exist. But the system has to change, structures have to change.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
the only way we can bring disability studies to the public, not just to academia broadly.
Yeah, and I think it's the only way to make disability studies less white. It has to be publicly available, accessible, and readable. It just has to be.
Yep.
Yeah. So we've got just a few more minutes. So I think I'm going to end on this question from a participant named Madeline, and ask, what are your thoughts on self-love as a way to fight against your oppressors?
Oh gosh, I think it's a constant kind of struggle, right? I think, I try really hard to love myself, but I don't think it's easy. I deal with a lot of the same internalized stuff that we do to each other that's, so toxic, so poisonous, so harmful. Like we do a lot, I think, as women and femmes and people, who are not men, consider men, really just, make yourself smaller, try to fit in, try to be palatable. And I think that's really just part of that work. I don't know if anybody's seen the Pixar film Turning Red, but I feel like that's kind of my goal. Like, I want to grow up to be like that red panda. Let it all hang out, like let all my furry bits hang out. And just explode and just take up that space. And I think these things are easier to say than do. I think I have to remind myself, right, when I'm hyping my friends, because I love to hype my friends up. I'm like, oh, so what about me? Like, I gotta listen to myself. But I think that's the hardest thing we have to deal with, right? That it's easy for us to love and root for others, but it's making that time and realizing that you absolutely should treat yourself. I think I do that just the other day. I mean, first of all, I love lattes, I love baked goods. I do not hold back on treating myself. Just the other day, I decided to get, for the very first time, personalized letter press stationery. Because you know what? God damn it, I deserve it. And that brings me joy. And that's an act of self love. So, whether it's a glass of wine for you, a bubble bath, or whatever, I think we all deserve whatever pleasure we can get in life. And I think that's something we constantly have to remind ourselves. It's a discipline. I think it's a discipline.
Mhm. Yeah, I think about the bell hooks quote that love is an action, never a feeling, right? And I think it's so important to apply that to self-love too, that it's like, it's not just a feeling of loving yourself, because there are days that you might not, or you might just not feel great, but to treat yourself lovingly, even on the days where you're not feeling a ton of love for yourself, like that is, it's the practice. And the more that you do it over and over and over again, it becomes easier and easier to treat yourself with the care that, yeah, I think we often show other people more than ourselves.
And I do hope with this pandemic that we give each other the gentleness and the grace, right, that we extend to others. Let's extend that to ourselves.
Yeah.
Or let's be a little bit more forgiving of ourselves if we fuck something up. It's okay. Like, I'm gonna get through it. It is what it is, right? We move on. So I think as we hopefully extend each other more grace and more understanding, that we do that for ourselves.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Alice.
I love you, Sami.
I love you too. I so appreciate your work and your time and all of it. I'm going to turn it back over to Stephanie to wrap us up.
Well, Alice and Sami, that was amazing. Thank you so much for both of your time. I really enjoyed this conversation. It really pairs nicely with all of the events that we already had today that are coming up in the next 2 days. And I just want to thank both of you for joining us and facilitating such a great dialogue. I really want to thank our amazing interpreters tonight. Sue and Scotty did a great job interpreting the session. And we also had somebody doing cart captioning as well for this session. So we really appreciate the support for that. Lydia Rook-Dahl is the Women's and Gender Studies Consortium Administrative Assistant and provided a lot of tech support for this call. And Carla Strand, the Gender and Women's Studies librarian, was dropping a ton of great links in the chat that we'll send out later if you want to keep researching and engaging with these topics in the coming weeks and months. And we're all looking forward to the amazing books that are coming out in the fall. So thank you for highlighting those and the alignment of all of those great pieces coming together at once. I want to thank our audience for joining us tonight. We put some links in chat. There are a lot more conference events coming up over the next 2 days, and we hope that you will join us. But thank you for all of the wonderful questions, and thank you for being a great audience. And we really appreciate everybody's participation in this event in the conference. And we hope you all have a great night.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night. Good night.